Kathleen was a sixth grade student who had trouble with her math studies. She was spending extra time studying and was not able to hang out with her friends. Her friends tried to help her with her studies, but she found it difficult to understand the concepts behind the math problems. She was afraid it would keep her from going to the high school that she and her friends were all hoping to get into. She worked hard studying and at times was able to catch on, but overall found the concepts difficult to master. One day in class, the teacher could see on Kathleen's face that she was having a somewhat more difficult time than ever catching on. So as usual, he showed the class a few different ways to work the problems so they could understand the concept. Suddenly, Kathleen sat up straight, her eyes opened wide. A smile came on her face, and she literally looked like a light had gone off over her head. "I got it," she exclaimed. Kathleen visibly showed she understood the math, and her entire being seemed to be reborn. No longer did that math seem a mystery to her, and now she could spend the time with her friends and share in all of the fun that they had outside of school. Likewise, in today's gospel, the leper that Jesus met wanted something similar as Kathleen did, to fit back into his community. The leper didn't ask to be healed. He said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Healing the sores of leprosy is far different than being made clean. Jewish society was heavily invested in eating and drinking the proper kinds of food, and these dietary guidelines were integral in being the chosen ones of God. It separated them from other peoples, like the Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks too had their guidelines, but nothing as strenuous as the Jews. Being clean concerned matters of holiness and purity, and it was a question of the kinds of actions, matters, and places which were either desired or out of bounds for the people in the community. Following the rules would allow one to be clean and move about society freely. But if one came in contact with something or someone unclean, they too became unclean and was then required to do a sacrifice offering or ritual washing. When one was unclean, they were not only physically separated from their community, but emotionally and spiritually as well. This is why the leper wanted Jesus to make him clean again, so he could once again be part of his Jewish community. The words of the gospel were meant to take away those physical constraints and lead us to a more spiritual togetherness. In our second reading, Paul says God does not want to put physical constraints on us, that the gospel is demanding enough. People do not need to be burdened with obligations that are outside of the gospel's message. For example, the eating and the drinking regulations. We are to judge what actions or words we are to take according to doing things by the glory of God. The glory of God and the sensitivity to the consciences of others should be the driving force. And this is not easy. Paul says to be imitators of him as he is of Christ. Paul has adapted himself to the needs of others and has done this in the example of Christ. Paul says that he tries to please everyone in every way, not just a select few. So do we include all? Inclusion is about learning to live together. It builds community by each one of us sharing our abilities and our gifts with each other. It seems that this word inclusion may at times have a negative connotation to some of us. Some of us may think of it as a mandate that we must not only allow others in, but allow them to practice ways that is not pleasing or acceptable to our own. We think of the way we feel put out by having to adapt to a way that is not ours, and more important to us, not one we would want for ourselves or our families. But it's not a negative when it's put to proper use. If we are imitators of Christ, we will include all without beating someone over the head with the word. The idea of inclusion is not meant to be a weapon. It's meant to be a guiding principle that we can all live by. We've all heard the phrase that God does not give anyone anything more than he or she can handle. That being true, then we should not be expected to live anyone else's way but our own, guided by the gospel. If we are truly guided by the gospel, then regardless of the side that we're on, we would be able to live a life that includes all people, regardless of any physical or emotional or spiritual difference they have from us. Sharing our abilities and gifts with them is also a point of the gospel, as we hear many times that story of the servants who received talents from their master, and they are to go out and multiply their talents. Then they're being rewarded. But we also hear that one servant buries his talents, and he is cast out, away from the community in which he lived. Being part of a community is a natural desire for humans, but living in one is a learned behavior. We must all learn to live by the gospel as Paul tells us, for then we will be imitators of Christ. Kathleen wanted to be an active part of her community of friends. The leper wanted to be a fruitful member of his community as a whole. And Paul, he wants us to be a part of our community as Christ imitators. We can do this by including all people in our community and by sharing our gifts and our talents. Then we will be living the gospel of Jesus.